All right, guys, happy Monday. This is your weekly update of what we're doing. We're in week 5, so we're getting close to being about halfway done through the course. Just as a quick reminder, the first exam, parts 1 and 2, do close tomorrow night at 11:59, so make sure you've taken both tests before then. Um, Go back through the video that I uploaded last week, giving you pretty big clues and hints about what to expect. Um, I have posted comments on discussion question 6 as of this morning, so you should be all set to look at those. This is our second and final 1 week, or last week was. This week we do have 2 discussion questions. This is lesson 7 is the hardest lesson that we have in this class, and that's because we're entering literary modernism, the 20th century, and it's an experimental type of literature, so it's not going to make a lot of sense. So the first thing I want to say to you is when you go into the module, I would encourage you to watch the video that's in there first from the professor from YouTube. That'll give you kind of an overview about T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. It's not written to make sense, and that's what I want to emphasize. There is meaning there, but we have to figure out how to read it. We are going to look at, in modernist poetry in particular, the specific techniques that they developed 100 years ago. This is what I want you to understand about the relationship between style and content. The modernists felt that the experience of everyday life had been broken up, fragmented, that things just weren't making sense anymore. And so they developed techniques that were designed to sort of recreate through the reading experience, the experience of everyday life. The content is pretty downbeat. It's all about alienation, despair, a sense of loss, death. It's not the most uplifting form of literature, but the different techniques that they developed were all designed to make the experience of reading poetry much harder. So this lesson 7 in particular will be your most frustrating set of readings. I would start with Marianne Moore and look at what she is trying to do with the definition of poetry, and talk a little bit about, especially the last line about imaginary gardens with real toads, or I always get it wrong, maybe real gardens. I think it's imaginary gardens with real toads, but it could be the other way around. I can't remember. It's early, but go through that and try to get an idea of the prejudice against poetry as being elitist. A lot of these poets did not write for general audiences. They were really writing for a very limited marketplace, and they were just being as experimental as possible. That said, The Wasteland is probably the most famous poem of the 20th century, and the reason for that is because of the use of fragmentation, juxtaposition, and allusion in order to create a sense of the breakdown in society of modern life. Especially, it was felt especially after World War II, or World War I, excuse me. So I've given you a lot of supplementary material in order to reassure you that if you try to get into The Wasteland and it's not making any bit of sense, that that's the point. Same with Ezra Pound's Hugh Selwyn Mauberley. The idea there is that the poem is communicating through allusions and fragments and bits and pieces. So I take you through all of those to give you a general idea of the meaning and of what we're going for. In The Wasteland, the thing that I would encourage you to think about most is the relationship between the allusions to classical and older traditional literature in everyday life. What Eliot is trying to say there is our way to cope, our way to understand does exist, but we have to get back in contact with uh, with the literary tradition and to understand, what the meaning or the meanings that seem to no longer have importance, that they're there for us to reconnect with. So the wasteland, he gives us essentially four parts that tell us modern life is breaking down, and it's tied to air, earth, sea, um, but it's in the final section where he really comes around and gives us hope. And the reason for that is Eliot was a Christian poet at the end of the day, so he's looking at the way that religious stories or myths still have meaning in the modern age and what we can do. The most important line comes toward the end when he talks about the Fisher King and the idea of um, the knight who in medieval times would bring a sense of prosperity back to the land, that would revivify the land. And he says, "These fragments I have shored against my ruins." And that's the most important part. You can think of that as the key to the poem. He's taking all these little bits and pieces of fragments of older literature, and he's shoring them up or bringing them together, trying to stitch them together in order to find some hope for coping through the sort of despair of post-World War I life. Pound has a very different sort of approach. That's really a sort of biography in his poetry. And what he's doing is he's trying to create a new sense of what poetry should be in the 20th century. And it all basically boils down to the old definitions are not working, so we have to come up with something new. Pound came up with the sort of imperative, make it new. That's what modernists were all about. Recreate the experience. Now, it wasn't that the ideas were new. It wasn't that the sort of connections to the past were new, but they had to be reinvented to have new meaning. We had to put the old ideas into new packages, if you want to put it that way. Find new ways of expressing old ideas in order to make it feel imperative, make it feel important. So again, that's basically the gist of modern poetry. Modern fiction is a little different. It's a little more accessible. We mainly talk in Lesson 8 about symbolism and about the use of two different types of symbolism. One I call external, which we're just focusing on physical things, whether that's hands in a story called Hands, or whether we're talking about a particular city, the city of Paris, or we're talking about money. We switch gears then and we talk about internal symbolism in Catherine M. Porter and Ernest Hemingway, and that's really just the use of interior monologue and stream of consciousness to sort of talk about the role of dreams or visions in modernist fiction in order to convey, again, stylistically, some of the metaphorical meanings of the themes. Themes are all the same. It's all about the breakdown of values, about despair, about post-World War I life, about the search for some sort of way to make modern life meaningful when the old truths don't seem to be working anymore. And we go pretty extensively in the lessons into the meanings of all four of those short stories. So make sure you read those before you try to take on the discussion questions. Otherwise, we should be all set. Again, this is probably our most difficult week in terms of the readings. It does get easier from this week on out, so just keep that in mind. Otherwise, we should be all set. If you have questions or concerns, I did post the scores for our first batch of lessons 1 through 5. And again, my main point is that if you got an 8, you're doing exactly what you need to be doing. You're replying to other students, you're replying to me, you're doing all 5. I see some improvement there. A lot of us are at 7s because maybe I'm not quite seeing the improvement that I want to see, or that you're not quite hitting it for each of those lessons the number of responses that we want, or you're not responding to me. Anything 6 or below, you're probably missing at least one of the discussion questions, and you're maybe not going into, remember these are 500 words, so there's a few of us that are coming in at 300 or maybe even 275. So make sure that you're getting all the way up there so you have the development that I'm looking for. Otherwise, if you have questions, just drop me a line, and we'll see you next week, but I will be in touch later in the week. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.